And once again, uh, good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. Thank you for joining for another session of Azure Power Lunch. And once again, our disclaimer that this call is being recorded. We place our recordings on our YouTube channel. If you don't want to be recorded, you may want to drop off now. And this call is joined by our Microsoft team members as well as members from our customers and uh, partners. So, topic of our discussion is Azure Kubernetes cluster with API Server VNet integration. This has just gone into preview. As we always do, we are going to do a quick lap around level set on um, the service itself, which is managed Kubernetes or Azure Kubernetes Service. We're going to go over what this feature is all about, what it brings to the table, and see a quick demo. And of course, please feel free to ask any questions. So, first of all, what is Azure Kubernetes Service? It's a managed Kubernetes, provides you the best of both worlds. Kubernetes running on Azure platform hides a lot of complexity um, that is there in setting up the infrastructure, a Kubernetes service, and provide services like Azure Monitor and things like that to easily monitor your Kubernetes deployment. So basically, match of best of both worlds. One of the most powerful um, container orchestration, the form of Kubernetes and Azure Cloud. So that's what this service is all about. Um, and just some quick highlights. The management plane is taken over by Azure, so you don't have to worry about setting up management nodes and all. That is taken care of by Azure. You just, deploy your workloads on the worker nodes, and that's what you pay for. So that's kind of a quick summary of Azure Kubernetes Service. So what is this feature? So first of all, before we go any further, I want to spend a minute on this diagram here, which is when you deploy an AKS cluster with a public endpoint, you are able to access the API server. And what is the API server? It is basically the management plane of your Kubernetes. That's or application management plane. It's a REST service that you sends commands to deploy your application, check on the status of things, nodes, pods, services, things like that. Um, and there is a kubectl, kubectl, sometime known as kubectl. That is, if you are using that, basically you're talking to the API server. Okay, so when managed Kubernetes started, there used to be only a public endpoint. So the way you access it through public endpoint, through a public IP, this API server, based on to meet the customer requirement for enterprise customer, this model came into um, existence, which is still which is GA now, which is the ability to have a private cluster. What is a private cluster? In that cluster, you don't have any public endpoint. API server, there is a private link service sitting on top of the API server load balancer that you create private endpoints. When you create a private cluster, that private endpoint is dropped into your AKS VNet, and you can use it to access access the API server, or you can create a private endpoint in another subscription as well, in a VNet, another subscription, or another different VNet, and that's how you can access it. So you basically it's a private link service, and you create private endpoints to access the API server. Okay. Everybody with me so far? Any questions? And by the way,
We're
this,
with
yeah,
you.
go ahead. Yes, please. Oh, great. So, just want to clarify one thing here, that this model is available as of today. It's in GA, so anybody who want to use it, they can take advantage of it. So this is publicly available GA. So what's this new model which has just gone into public preview? What that brings to table? So what that model is, and let me just populate the diagram. It does not require a PLS or anything. What they're doing is they are dropping or projecting the terminology they're using, the API server endpoint into the AKS VNet. So when you create your cluster, you are creating a VNet um, to put those nodes in that cluster. And in that VNet, you will have two subnets. One subnet will host or will have your worker nodes. Those worker nodes will be deployed there, and they will be running in that. Basically, your um, node pools will be running in that particular subnet. The second subnet, which is a delegated subnet to the API server, will have the projected endpoint of the API server. Okay, so there's no need to do a private endpoint or anything, and that's that's how you will access it. So so there are kind of a couple of key differences, or one key difference I just want to emphasize with the private endpoint model that we have in GA. You can create multiple private endpoints, and in different VNets, or in different subscription if you want. But in this one, there is only one projected endpoint that is available, and that goes into the delegated API server subnet. Okay, and so if you are looking at using this model, um, just in keep an eye on this. If you need to access it from a different subnet, or sorry, different VNet than where your AKS is deployed, you will have to have VNet peering to make sure that you can have a line of sight to this projected endpoint of the API server. Okay. Any questions? And this is in public preview at the moment. And this is kind of a quick summary. So there are some limitations that you should be aware of. If you have an existing cluster, you cannot migrate it to this model at the moment. Existing cluster cannot be migrated to this API server VNet integration model, which is kind of similar to like app service VNet integration, but you cannot migrate it existing AKS cluster into this model. Second thing is, at the moment, only private clusters are supported with this. Okay. And third thing to know is, if you have a private, and we already talked about it, this VNet integration model, you cannot create private endpoints on top of it. So there is no private link service that you can put in. You cannot have both. You can I only have one. So once you have the API server VNet integration, you cannot put private link service on top of it. So just be careful. So I know that I have kind of worked with some customers where they have their AKS workloads deployed in VNets that are not connected to on-prem through express route. Only connectivity going back and forth is private endpoints. And they were using the private endpoints model that AKS has, with private cluster to connect uh, to the API server, and you run kubectl commands and things like that. So they were using that model since they don't have connectivity, as I said, from their workload VNets where the AKS is running to on-prem. So they were using this private endpoint. They have a network that is connected to on-prem um, through Express route, and that's where they drop the private endpoint, and that's how they do it. So for them, this model may not work. But other customer who have their AKS clusters, that model will provide connected to on-prem through Express route. This will provide, I think, more simpler model without cost of private link and private endpoints and things like that. Because just keep in mind, if you create a private endpoints are not free. You're paying for that. But in this case, this projected endpoint of the API server, that is part of the deployment, so there is no charge for it. Of course, you will pay for worker nodes as usual, but there's no charge for this. So just keep that in mind. So with that, any questions as we start with a short demo? Okay, so the directions on how to set up this thing, this model are kind of very clear in the documentation, but some things to keep in mind. Make sure before you do that, make sure that your CLI is updated to the latest version. Because I came across a weird issue where I was not able to run the commands. And since in public preview, I was able to work around it by upgrading my version, Azure CLI version, to the latest. So for example, if let me go into uh, this, let me go here and let me just increase the font size a little bit. Okay, I hope everybody can see it. So if I kind of, so this is the latest version, 2.39. That's the version I am running, and I will highly recommend that if, oh, come on, that if you are running the demo, or are you, if you're planning to run the the walkthrough or quick start, please upgrade it. That will save you um, kind of a lot of heartburns. Second thing is you will have to in, add the extension. If you already have it, you will have to update the extension, because this extension has the preview updates are in that extension, so you will have to update it. So just keep that in mind. Okay. Um, and that will be pretty quick. For example, if I do it now, let's do it quickly. Uh, and it will say the extension. Oh, sorry, I think I have it on a different. Oh, I'm on the wrong VM. Sorry, guys. Let me go here. Properties. Or so it says latest version is already installed. So that version is already there. And then what I do is you will have to kind of install that feature, and just keep in mind this will take some time. So once you start running it, so this is basically enabling this feature. In my case, it's already saying registered because I have registered it. I notice it takes a few minutes, and the way you can check it, there is this command that will um, that you can run, and this will give you the state of if if everything is running fine. So let me just in here. And then finally, you will have to register your container service again. Okay, so you have to go in here. I mean, it's showing me registered, and then you will register your container service again. And with that, once that is registered, you are good to go. There are, and I'm not going to go through all the steps in creating. I just want to show you this flag. So this is the flag that you have to put in. Enable API Server VNet Integration. Once you put that flag, that will make sure that your cluster is created with API Server VNet Integration. Okay, and there are two ways that you can do it. You can use this simple command. I mean, that will take care of creating the VNet and all of it. Or if you have an existing VNet, then you will have to create an identity. Make sure you give that identity network contributor access to your VNet. You should have proper subnets there. Two subnets need, one the cluster subnet, one the API server subnet. As I said before, in the cluster subnet, it will have your worker nodes and all the cluster stuff will be there. And in the API server subnet, it will be delegated, and you will have the IP address of projected API server IP address there. Okay, and the commands are still are pretty much the same. This is the key here, this particular line that will create that. So let's take a look at the um, infrastructure. And by the way, if there are any question in the chat window, I can't see the chat window. If somebody can see those, please feel free to read out. I will really appreciate it. Okay, so let's go into, so this is the resource group I have that I created. As you can see, I have created a managed identity as well as is in the documentation. And let's take you to the network, the virtual network where we have that cluster deployed. As you can see here, there are two subnets. I've ignored the VM subnet that I created later for my jump box, but this is the AKS cluster subnet. That's where your worker nodes and all of that will be there. And this is the API server subnet. And as you can see, this is delegated. So you cannot deploy any other thing in that subnet, any VM or any other resource. This is right now delegated to the managed cluster service, basically AKS service. That's what it delegated to. Okay. Um, So that's that. And so at this point, the cluster is created. And let me show you the cluster as well. Uh, so let's go into the resource group. And this is the cluster. And as you can see here, this is the IP server, all of that DNS. I mean, it's same cluster. The only thing is a API server of that uh, endpoint to the API server is projected inside a subnet. Okay, that's all there is to it. So what we can do is,
quick question, Navi.
yes, please.
Navi,
Go ahead, please.
I noticed you put a 28 in there with 10 available IPs, because I know if you pick an API server that has more than one, like the SLA has more than one, so there's a minimum size. What's the minimum size for that? Because they're pretty stingy with their IPs.
Yeah, so this is the minimum size, man. That's 28.
Thank you.
Yeah, so that's the, and by the way, I'm just following the direction in the document. That's the minimum size they recommend. And there are some more guidance. And since it's in public preview, I am assuming that it will evolve as the time passes. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so let's see what are the um, you know what are the IP addresses that we have in that. So if we go in here, this is basically the resource group. So this is the jump box that I dropped in, and what I'm gonna do is this is a Linux machine, and I'm gonna try to connect to the AKS cluster. So this is the Linux machine running here, and from here, if I wanna run the, for example, kubectl get nodes, I can do a get nodes. So just keep in mind, this is a VM that is running inside the the uh, VNet where the projected IP address of the AKS cluster is dropped. So that has direct line of sight. I can connect to it, and there are no issues. But the same thing now, I am on-prem. This is the Linux kind of a subsystem for Linux Ubuntu running. And if I try to run the same command here, for example, this one, kubectl get nodes, and I have already done AKS credential, so let me do that again. Okay, it's merged, and if I try to do that here, um, get nodes, it's going to tell me unable to connect to the server, no such host. So the thing is, it cannot get to that private IP address because it's in that VNet. I'm running here. There is no connectivity to that. So just to prove the point that you have a private cluster with a private IP address for the API server that you can connect, but you need to have a line of sight to connect to. So just keep that in mind. Um, Going with that model. So that's a quick demo. And as I said, just keep in mind, make sure to update your um, CLI to the latest version before running, going over this, running over this quick start. And I have the links here in the resource. And let me just go over this documentation a bit. It's 1 second. Let me bring it here.
This is really great, Navi. Thank you for presenting this today because enterprise is only using the private clusters, and this makes things a lot easier.
Yeah, I mean, this is another option. And thank you. And this is another option. And I think it makes things simple, and probably a little bit less costly, as you have private endpoint cost there. But once again, just options are available. So uh, take a look at these and see if that fits your customers' requirement. So as I said, just make sure once again upgrade your CLI to the latest version, and then go from there. These documentations pretty decent, and it goes over both scenarios. You want to create your AKS cluster using a managed VNet, which is basically a VNet inside Azure, and the second one, or managed by Azure, and this is a second one, which is where you are creating your AKS cluster and bringing your own virtual network. Okay, so that's all pretty much I have for today. Any questions, comments, feedback?
So if you want to expose the API to the external, then you just put an application gateway into that VNet, right?
That's right. I mean, you have to find a way to expose it to external. Yes, application gateway is one of the option. Yes. But normally what's going to happen is you're going to be accessing it from on-prem. I mean, this is not for external user. This is basically you are managing or deploying your application. You are kind of updating them. You're getting their status. So it's all the kubectl command. So whenever you're running kubectl, basically you're running API server. So normally it will be some sort of a kind of a you know either VNet peering or that VNet is connected to on-prem through express route or site-to-site VPN, things like that. Any other questions, folks? Okay. So I will give everybody their 3 minutes back and thank you for joining and have a wonderful weekend. Hope to see everybody next week for another session of Azure Power Lunch. Stay safe, folks.
You too, Navi. Thank you, sir.